Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Congresswoman Chrissy Houlihan's telephone town hall. Thank you all for joining us on the line tonight. We have a lot of callers, so I just wanted to give the rules in terms of how to ask a question. At any point within the call, if you have a question you'd like to ask the Congresswoman, please press *3 on your phone. Again, if you have a question at any point throughout the call, please press *3. You'll be transferred to one of the Congresswoman staffers who will drop down your question and put you in the queue. And for the last time, that is *3. We'll remind you periodically throughout the call. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Congresswoman Houlihan.
Thank you, Connor, and good evening to everyone, and thank you all for joining us tonight on our telephone town hall. I definitely wish we were coming together under very different circumstances to have a conversation about something other than the events of the last week or so, but I'm really very thankful to be here with our community at this moment, virtually, of course, to provide an update from our nation's capital, which is where I am right now, and to take questions that you might have. Before I begin with kind of the subject at hand, I would like to say thank you so much for those of you all who reached out to me and to my team, and in some cases to my family as well, to say thank you and also to inquire about my safety. I'm very appreciative of those inquiries, and for the most part that day I was safe, and I'm very, very grateful for people expressing that concern. Wednesday was the day that we as members were scheduled to meet to certify the 2020 election, and the President of the United States on that day incited an attack on the Capitol in an effort to stop the will of the people, to stop the process of certifying those results. I believe that this was a domestic terrorist attack, and I believe that for a number of different reasons. First off, there were quite a lot of people who were penetrating the walls of the Capitol, which has historically happened only once several hundred years ago, a couple hundred years ago, shouting, "Hang Mike Pence," amongst other things. They were also searching actively for the location of the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. They brought with them Confederate flags. They replaced the United States Stars and Stripes with the Trump flag. They wore shirts that in some cases read things such as 6MWE, and for those who don't know what that stands for, it stands for 6 million were not enough with respect to the Holocaust and how many Jews were lost in the Holocaust. Some of them chanted that they wanted people's heads on pikes. The more, frankly, that we learn about the unfolding events of the 6th, the more alarmed I think many of us are about what the intent was of this group. And the president's actions and role in this attack are a threat. They're not only a threat to our democratic republic, but they're also a threat to our national security. And so I believe that the president has abdicated his responsibility to safeguard our nation that we hold so dear. And so this evening we'll have a conversation about what we are moving forward on and what our options and opportunities are to try to protect this nascent still democracy. One of those options which I have asked the Vice President as well as his cabinet to invoke is the 25th Amendment. This is an appropriate opportunity or way to remove the president from office. The Vice President makes the decision on with consultation and with his cabinet, and I believe very much that this is an option, an important and viable option to send a missive both to our American people and also, frankly, to the international community, that this man is not fit to serve as the leader of our country and the leader of the free world. So this evening we will be taking a vote on a referendum that asks the Vice President to consider this within the next 24 hours. I do not take this vote lightly. I will be voting affirmatively to ask the Vice President to do that. I do recognize how grave the division is in this country, and I do know that we must do everything in our power as elected leaders and as individuals to heal the country. And I am very committed to that healing process and very much looking forward to the new year and hopefully a better and brighter year for all of us. But I am also simultaneously bound by the Constitution, something that I have sworn to protect, to support, to defend, both as a member of Congress and prior to my responsibilities here as an officer in the United States Air Force. And that oath is a commitment to community and country that I take very, very seriously. And I have to uphold that, as I believe all leaders do, in order for the experiment that is the United States to be able to continue. So despite the violent attack on Wednesday, I very much still have hope. I have witnessed my colleagues in the last 5 or 6 days, both Democrats and Republicans, making very conscious choices to hold by our sacred oath, to work together and stand up for the voters of this country. When we together on the late hours and wee hours of the 6th and the 7th actually did certify those election results on behalf of the American people. The Vice President and the members of the Cabinet witnessed those events that we did as well, just as we here in Congress experienced them. And I very much believe that they have an obligation to this country that they need to answer as well. So I do ask that the Vice President invoke the 25th Amendment, because our democracy depends on that. If the administration does fail to acknowledge the threat that is emanating from this president and his remaining in office through the remainder of the days of this administration, and should they fail to remove him from office, then the Congress will unfortunately need to use the remedies that we have, which is why I have also signed on to a single article of impeachment. And that article of impeachment speaks very, very narrowly to the events of the 6th and the events that led a mob from the White House to the Capitol, from the executive branch to the legislative branch, and resulted in the death of several citizens as well as 2 Capitol Police officers. And so that piece of legislation, that single article of impeachment, will come up for the floor for a vote tomorrow, and I will be voting for that. With each passing day that the president remains in office, I believe that the threat still exists. We saw that after a 15-minute speech that this president was successful in sending a mob straight to Congress. And so I have a bunch of concerns, but one of them is the fact that within a half of a day we had blood spilled in our hallowed and sacred halls of Congress, and I worry that every hour matters and every day matters. I also worry that our adversaries, both domestically and abroad, are watching, and they're frankly reveling in the fragility that they've seen in our democracy over the last week or so. They saw a mob successfully infiltrate one of the most heavily guarded and sacred buildings, not just in the United States, but in the world. So I do understand, and I'm sure that some of your questions will surround why the urgency, why the sense of expediency, why not focus on healing? And I genuinely have struggled with that. But my resolution is that the right thing to do, the way to focus us on healing, is to acknowledge the truth. I wore at one point a uniform for the United States Air Force, and there I worked on anti-ballistic missile defense. And so my job was to imagine the unimaginable when a nuclear missile was fired at us, and what decisions we would make in those few, in some cases minutes and in some cases hours, while that nuclear missile was heading our way. My job was to think about those hours and days. And so never once in my very young career in the military did my commanding officer tell me that there wasn't enough time or that I should just wait it out to address this threat of national security. And so for me, I very much approach this in a similar way. I'm committed to heal this nation. I know that part of that healing, though, includes holding our people responsible, all people responsible who participated in Wednesday's domestic terrorist attacks. So I believe we have to send a resounding message to our allies and to our adversaries that we will not stand for an attack on U.S. soil, certainly one that is not provoked and perpetrated by the commander-in-chief of this nation. With that, I very, very much sadly will hand it back over to Connor. I'm certain that there are quite a lot of questions. I am grateful for the chance to be here and having this conversation with you today. I would ask that each and every one of you assume the best of each other and of me, that we are all patriots, that we all love this nation, that we all grieve for our nation as it's bleeding, and that we all want to see our nation healed. With that, I'll turn it back over to Connor for any questions that he might have.
Perfect. Thank you, Congresswoman. So a reminder to everyone on the line, pressing *3 will get your question in the queue. So if you haven't had an opportunity, please press *3. We do have a large number of questions, so I'd like to get started right away. And our first question comes from from Marcus Kelly Marcus in Westchester, I believe. So 1 second, you should be on the line. Kelly, do we
hi
have
there.
you? Hello.
Yes, hi there. Today we saw the report of Congress people as well as their staff leaving posters and cards to thank the Capitol Police for their valiant efforts to fend off the Capitol as well as protect members of Congress and the staff. Is there something that we can do as the community to send and show support to our Capitol Police to thank them for their honor and their commitment and working in such, brave ways?
Thanks, Kelly, and I agree. I have to say that my ordeal on Wednesday, throughout the entire thing, I felt really indebted to and grateful for the Capitol Police, and I appreciate very much the spirit of your ask, because I would like to find ways wherever we're able to thank the Capitol Police, because that I can't even imagine the situations that they approached. My understanding is that you can actually mail them a letter or a postcard and send them a thank you card, and my understanding is that you can go to the U.S. Capitol Police website to do that, and the website for that is USCP, or the United States Capitol Police.gov. So please feel free to do that. I would very much encourage you to do that. You can also contact my office as well as our senator's office, which are equipped to take those calls too, to make sure that we aren't, distracting our Capitol Police as they're trying to understand what happened and preventing it in the future. You're welcome to also call our offices for that. Thank you, Kelly, for your compassion.
Thank you, Kelly. Our next question comes from Pat in Chadds Ford. Pat, you should be on the line now.
Hello. From what I'm hearing already, that you've decided what your path will be with this impeachment. And, I just want to remind you, you are a representative of all the people. And half of us voted for him. And we are not about to heal very quickly if you continue to go down this road. The FBI came out today saying that they had advance warning of this, that there was planning to this. And that means that this was already planned. It started before the Trump people even finished their speeches. They started breaking the windows and going in minutes before. So he didn't incite this group to go down to the Capitol and do this. This was something that was planned ahead of time, and the FBI knows that. And they should have warned everybody in the Capitol, including the police, to be more ready for this to happen.
Pat, I very, very, very much appreciate our conversation and the spirit that you have, and you're bringing this to me, because this is hard. It's hard for all of us. And I believe that the FBI is continuing to do their investigative work and understanding what exactly unfolded here. But what I would have to say is that I very much believe that we need to hold this president accountable now for his actions and his behaviors. I do know that we need to respect, as you do, and point out that we come from a very, very purple place. I don't know whether you're from Chester County or Berks County, but one thing that I talk to people all the time about is that in Chester County we have 40% Democrats and 40% Republicans and 20% independents. We are a purple place, and very, very regularly we'll vote for, let's say, President Trump at the top of the ticket, and then maybe me, and for Congress, and then maybe a Republican, for the state house. And I know that all of those results we need to find to be valid. That same ticket that voted for one, whether the president or president-elect, might also be a ticket that have voted for a different person for Congress. And so we really need to be respectful and hold all of the votes sacred, and this president accountable for calling out falseness, rallying people towards false narratives about an election that was stolen, and asking for people to respond in a violent way. And I very much respect the spirit with which you come to this conversation. And one of the things I so appreciate about your question is that we are having a civil conversation. I think, as we talked about before, good people can do the best jobs they can to make the best decisions they are able, and that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to make the best decision that I can on our behalf.
Thank you, Pat, for your question. Our next question, I'm sorry. Our next question comes from Karen in Thorndale. Karen, you should now be on the line.
Oh, yes. I do have a couple of them. You mentioned that the Capitol was heavily guarded. From everything that I have seen on television, it did not appear to be heavily guarded, and I was wondering why that was. And if we're going to have really good elections in this country, we need a picture ID, and I wonder why the Democrats oppose it so much.
Thank you so much, Karen, for your questions. The first question had to do with the security of the Capitol. I think you're right. I think we were, and I think Pat touched on this a little bit too, we were caught flat-footed. There were some signs that we should have picked up on, that various alphabet soup organizations should have seen, that we should have been better prepared for the day, and we will definitely be unraveling that. And as a Congress, we're asking for investigations into that as well. What I meant by saying that the Capitol building is secure is that our world has kind of always seen that as being a bastion of security and safety, and a cradle of democracy, for lack of a better way of describing it. In terms of identification, I very much believe that this is a requirement that is driven by states, and how each state manages this is how we manage elections. At this point in time, there is no requirement for Pennsylvanians to have an identification. I believe the only exception is the very first time that they vote. And so I very much believe in supporting the law of the state.
Thank you, Karen, for your question. Our next question comes from Denise. Denise is in Exton. So, Denise, you should now be on the line.
Thank you, and good evening, Senator, and I really appreciate this opportunity. And my question is more of something of an umbrella question about how to keep making progress. I think this presidential election, showed that democracy depends more than ever on citizens exercising their right to vote, and it appears there was an overwhelming response to voting because of expanded options for voting. And I am dismayed to learn that some members of the Pennsylvania legislature seem to regret expanding those options for voting in Pennsylvania, because they wrote some kind of a proposal on December 2nd to reverse the Act 77, taking us back to the restriction of voting in 12 hours on one day, which is taking us back to the dark ages when you look at modernity and how complicated lives are today. So I just wanted to ask you, what do you suggest is the best way for constituents who do not want that to happen, because it would delay the possibility for a whole year of even getting it back on the calendar, and it takes 2 years of session to become a law. What's the best way to let our legislature know that we do not want them to throw the baby out with the bathwater?
I think your question is a really good one, and what I would say is, just like I am, duly elected into this office, so are the Pennsylvania state legislators who represent our community, the 6th congressional, but also the state. And because they are elected, they have the ability to make legislation as long as they have the votes, so to speak. And so I think that the best recourse you have is how we started, which is voting. And I am really excited by the enormous turnout that we experienced in Chester and Berks County and the Commonwealth as well. More than, I think it's pretty close to 80% of our district showed up to vote. And that's remarkable. Whether you're an R or a D, you should celebrate in the fact that we are exercising our right to vote. And in fact, I've shared, I think before, that my dad and my mom canceled each other's votes out for almost my entire life. Because one would vote R and one would vote D. And my dad, when I was being raised, would say, I don't care how you vote, but I care that you vote. And that's, I think, our first line of making sure that our voice is heard, is to continue to vote. Similarly, we've elected a Democratic governor. In addition to having a House legislature that is Republican controlled, we have a Democratic governor. And so he has the opportunity and the option, of course, to veto whatever it is that this current state legislature proposes in terms of reduction of, as you mentioned, kind of online voting and that sort of thing. And then lastly, of course, what we've seen in the course of the last couple of years is that the third part of our government, the courts, get to be that final check and balance to interpret the law. And so all of those kinds of things come into play. You have a play in that because you're, a constituent and a voter. At the federal level, I can talk to you about some of the things that we're doing that are not at the state, as you mentioned. At the federal level, last cycle, 2 years ago, we introduced a piece of legislation that was called House Resolution 1. It was called For the People. It was a very, very big piece of legislation, but some of the parts of it, some of the amendments to it or items on it, talked about exactly this issue, is making sure that we had the ability to vote, at not just one day as an example, or not just in one way as an example. And this was federal legislation that did pass the House of Representatives. A version of that will also be introduced this year, it looks as though. I think it will also be called H.R. 1 as well again, which indicates sort of the importance that the House places on this issue. So if you're interested in these kinds of issues, I would encourage you to call your state legislators. I would encourage you to call your representatives like me in our offices to tell them, just like you're engaging here on this conversation, what's important to you.
Thank you, Denise, for your question. Yes, our next question comes from Andrea in Kennett Square. Andrea, you should be on the line.
Okay, thank you very much for taking my call. My overarching question is, how do you propose to protect the free speech and religious rights of conservatives? In the past days, we have witnessed the deplatforming of Parler, and yet Twitter remains. We have seen Twitter allowing threats against Vice President Pence to remain posted while banning President Trump for life. We have seen big banks withholding their donations to Republicans. We have even seen members of Congress threatening to censor senators simply because they asked for investigations into alleged voter fraud prior to certifying the election. Also, the H.R. 1 bill that you talked about would take away states' rights by federalizing election processes, and it contains very scary provisions for banning certain types of speech during elections, very broad language that would allow speech to be banned if it was hate speech. Also, the so-called Equity Act is another way that the free speech and religious rights of conservatives would be crushed, because it would force religious conservatives to accept what we consider to be the sinful behavior of this LBGT lifestyle. Thank you very much for taking my question.
Oh gosh, I very much appreciate it. And again, what I very much appreciate is the spirit with which you bring it and the fact that we're having an open conversation. I, of course, serve to protect and defend the Constitution, and the First Amendment is central to that. The oath that I've taken, includes the Bill of Rights. And I will always defend an individual's right to freedom of speech and assembly. What's interesting, and you brought up some of the things that are happening with Twitter or with Parler, and those are definitely top of the news right now. As a government, as a government representative, as an elected person in our government, I am not able to to step into that, nor would you frankly want me to step into the private sector like that. That is something that is, at least under current law, not something that I'm able and allowed to help with or interfere with. I do appreciate some of the different nuances and disagreements that you and I might have on what HR 1 embodies. I know that you and I will probably agree on much more than we probably disagree on across a lot of other issues. And I appreciate that we can have that conversation. I am hopeful, kind of as a pragmatic person, that things like HR 1 and all of the other very huge pieces of legislation that I've experienced as a freshman, I wish that we would take those in bits and pieces and in parts, because I do believe that there are small bites of each one of these very big pieces of legislation that common sense, says makes sense and that more people would agree on. So it's one of the things that I advocate for in Congress, is to ask leadership on both sides and in both the House and the Senate to, kind of stop the political games and start being more pragmatic and just start finding the things that we can agree on. Because I do genuinely believe that there's more than we can imagine that you and I would agree on.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for your question. Our next question comes from Bruce in Westchester. Bruce, you are on the line.
Great. Thank you very much for taking my call. So we talk about healing, and I guess my question is, I'm the purple person you're talking about. I'm a registered independent. I vote equally Democrat as well as Republican, although more likely Democrat in the latest cycles. But I guess if we're talking about healing, do you think that if the Republican side and those that recognize this president for what he is would support this impeachment, which is totally justified for what has transpired, do you think that would be a first step towards healing for us as a country to recognize that this act is beyond impeachable? And can we get to a unification starting with this as a bipartisan effort? Can that be the first step towards healing?
Bruce, thanks. And that is actually my hope, exactly, which is the more that I try to, work myself through this with all of the inputs and all of our community's, needs and desires, the more I came to that place, which is we need to be able to bipartisanly, frankly, apartisanly recognize that this is not okay. And it also has to not be attached to what day of the week or what day of the month it is. It's never okay to do what just happened. And I have had a lot of conversations with my Republican colleagues. And if you're watching the news in the last few hours, you're seeing that at this point, 3 or 4 of my Republican congressmen have come out in support of impeachment, including the third most senior person, Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney's daughter. And so in the conversations that I've had with others, they worry, just as you do, about the destruction or possible separation that will result of this. But I worry that we can't afford not to try to come together on something that should unify us. What should unify us is this democracy. And so we will see. And I will continue to have those conversations with my colleagues across the aisle, with you guys. I know that Senator Toomey has recently committed that this is an impeachable act. I think it's really, really important that we really look hard at ourselves. I know I do all the time to try and figure out, what's best for the country and what's best for not just our party, but rather for the country.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Our next caller is Susan from Chester Springs. Susan, you should be on the line.
Hi, thank you for having this town hall. It's so important right now for us to have leadership. We need it more than ever. And as far as the impeachment issue has taken over the course of conversation in the U.S. away from COVID. So I have 2 things. One's about impeachment, and that is that I hear what people who are conservatives who are calling in are saying. And I hear conservatives say, why go for impeachment? We need to be focused on healing. But the truth is, the fact of the matter is, more than half of the country voted to elect President-elect Joe Biden. So you've got that number of people, plus even more, I would say, moderate Republicans or different Republicans who are coming out, like Colin Powell, Arnold Schwarzenegger, so many very famous people, and then so many normal people, just everyday citizens, are coming out saying, I am outraged by what happened on January 6th. And I think the one thing we can all agree on is that it's never acceptable to even think that you could be sending your elected representatives, like you, Ms. Houlihan, into harm's way. We could never accept that is a possibility. And so I feel like you have to go forward on impeachment, because as these perpetrators are being interviewed, and I've been reading them, it strikes me that they indicate that Trump called his, quote, digital warriors, end quote, to Washington. And we all know the facts of it. No reason to recite it again. But the thing I find interesting is that they honestly feel like they were simply doing what their president asked of them. But the interesting part is that they wanted to be pardoned, and they had this idea that President Trump would pardon them for doing this. So that tells me they know they were breaking the law, because you don't need to be pardoned if you didn't commit a crime. So they know they're committing a crime and breaking the law, but they feel like their president is above the law. And by extension, if he asks his digital warriors to come forward and do something for him, they're above the law. So I feel like for people like, I
want to make sure that we have time to get to your question too. I think you said something about maybe other than impeachment, you might have a question as well. I don't want to interrupt you. I just want to make sure that we don't lose the thread on that.
No worries. I just kept hearing the conservatives, and I thought maybe they should hear why someone like me feels it's important. But at any rate, the COVID issue. I know that they're working on, I'm hearing like Dodger Stadium being turned into a vaccination clinic. And so I wondered if there were any plans for that in Pennsylvania, because these numbers are extraordinary. Even worse than any of us could have imagined.
And what I would also say, and I forgot to say, and I apologize to the group, that I had intended also to say that you are welcome to ask questions of me of anything that isn't necessarily this issue, this very somber and very grave issue. You are always welcome to ask me questions about COVID, or about the most recent stimulus bills, or all those kinds of things. And so, with relationship to COVID and also to the stimulus bills, I spent the vast majority of today exactly on those issues. I spent several hours today with various chambers of commerce talking about our response to small and mid-sized businesses, and then had some conversations with the Secretary of Agriculture in Pennsylvania on our response to COVID, as well as the Phil Abundance folks on food scarcity. And your question about the vaccinations, something that I also do spend a lot of time on as well. We need to move forward more rapidly, both at the state level as well as at the national level, with our vaccination plan. I think you're starting to see that ramp up to some degree, but it's nowhere near fast enough, in my humble opinion. If you like, you can check out this Pennsylvania's plan, the state of Pennsylvania's plan, because at this point in time, many of our plans are very, very much state-driven. And so the Pennsylvania's plan can be found on health.pa.gov, like Pennsylvania, and you can see what's going on in our state and how that's unfolding. I have seen, as you have, the rollouts in stadiums and that kind of stuff. I think I saw something similar maybe in the convention center down in Philadelphia. But if you're a Chester County resident, and many of you guys who are on the call are, you can also go to Chesco, like ChesterCounty.org, and then /COVID vaccine. all one word, all squished together to kind of find out more information about our COVID vaccine response. I think that you've seen some changes in the last few days of the Trump administration in terms of how they're rolling out the vaccine. I think you will see some changes in the early days and weeks of the Biden administration. I know that their plan in the first 100 days is basically COVID, making sure that we're paying attention to testing and vaccination and rebuilding our economy. So I really appreciate the conversation both on the events of this week, but also on COVID, because that is really the place where I try to spend the vast majority of my time.
Thank you so much, Susan, for your question. Our next question comes from William Woodruff in Douglasville. William, you should be on the line.
Yes, I am. Congresswoman, thank you for taking my call.
Of course.
One of the things I find so frustrating through, and by the way, the last caller, I'm a lifelong Republican. I voted for you. I don't think this president represents my party, and what he's done is very against my values. One of the things I found very frustrating through his presidency is he was allowed to keep going and going and going. And we look back at the Kennedy assassination, and there were certain amendments that were put in place after that. And I don't know why there's such a gray area for this president to continue what he's done. Going forward, what can Congress or the Senate do to enact that this never happens again?
Sure. I think that that's a fascinating question. And in fact, I have that conversation with my team all the time. Kind of the never again agenda is, how we kind of loosely talk about it to make sure, regardless of your party affiliation, that we don't have this unfold with any person again. And part of it, to be really honest, is the conversation we started with, which is we have to call this out now. We can't abide by it. And that is part of the healing, but it's also part of the affirmation that we have to make with one another that this is not something that we can abide by. The other thing that we can do, I will add some color to that, which is I've had conversations with some of my colleagues that say, well, if we didn't impeach him the last time, it would be a lot easier this time, which I feel like is sort of a specious argument. Or, well, if it happened 6 months ago, it would be a whole lot easier, but we've only got 7 days right now, which feels also like an abdication of responsibility and a dereliction of duty. So there are things that we can do in addition to the actions that the House is taking to work in the next couple of years to shore this up. There are some proposals out there, like tightening up the Hatch Act. And the Hatch Act, you might or might not know what that is sort of the ethics that I'm guided by. And so as an example, I'm not allowed to advocate or advertise for anybody. I can't say, wow, I really like this guy and his products and you should buy them. I'm not allowed to. The president, any president is allowed to do that. Or maybe we will tighten up the budgeting process so that money can't be moved from one area to another. We had that situation in this particular administration, and it really called into question that no president should be able to do that in one way or another. Because I'll give you a hyperbolic example. Perhaps this president or one president might decide that something else is an emergency that many people don't believe is an emergency, for instance, a border wall. So we have been tightening up the budgetary and appropriations process in the last year, and we will continue to do that. So there are some proposed legislative, ways that we can do that. On the security side of how do we make sure that this literal thing doesn't happen again, that we make sure that we are securing the Capitol and the process and the people who are in it. I and a number of other people are calling for a full investigation into this, making sure that we learn our lessons. My guess is that this will be not dissimilar from the 9/11 experience that many of us have gone through, depending on how old you were. And then importantly, the last thing I would say to you is there is this more important conversation, I think, which is the civility and decency conversation that we've had in the last 40 minutes or so, and the civics and the engagement side. We need to work really hard together to find our common ground. We need to work really, really hard together to find that stuff that we can all agree on. And we need to work really, really hard to find our civic soul and to be engaged and to educate ourselves. We need to work really hard to insist on facts and to insist on transparency and accountability. And another thing that I've been advocating for is to try to get more people to collide with one another. You know, I served in the military, as we've talked about. I also did serve something called Teach for America through AmeriCorps. I think that we need to have more national service that requires us to meet each other in places that are not places we would normally see one another, to make each other more human. I think one of the things that I wish didn't have to happen from last week is, I think one of our questioners asked this, it sort of humanized people who are here in Washington, right? You know, we're just people too, and we have families, and we're trying to do our jobs, and we're trying to represent, and this was terror. And so I really think there's a lot we can do, both legislatively and kind of in our own communities, to try to make sure that we bring ourselves together again.
William, thank you so much for your question. Our next question comes from, sorry, we're having technical difficulty, from Jim Sullivan in West Brandywine. Jim, you should be online.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Congresswoman, or is it Congressperson nowadays?
It's Chrissy, but thank you.
I get scared about this. You're a female, I know that. So, but no, I appreciate you taking the call. I am one of those split voters. I thought you deserved a second term, even though I am a Republican, because you're an honest person. And that matters to me. Honesty matters a whole lot. You and I would have very heated debates on some of the things you believe in and some of the things I neither nor at the moment. First of all, the 25th Amendment is really, as you know, is based upon health or mental health. And you'd have to, you know, that's a big push on this one. Even though, you know, you can ask them to do it, they probably wouldn't do it. My concern about you for impeachment for tomorrow is I've been listening to the Honorable Claiborne from South Carolina, and he suggests you wait for the first 100 days before you impeach so that Mr. Biden can get his nominees approved in the Senate. Because as you know, if you get it and pass it and send it to the Senate, nothing gets accomplished. You know, and I understand your position. I think impeachment is a divider, but you know what? If you believe in it and you're going to do it, fine. But it doesn't bring people together. I would rather you, if you're going to do it, wait till it's out. The whole goal of it, I think, is to make sure that he never gets into any public office in the future. Mm-hmm. And I understand that wholly. Why not censure? You know, because he's not going to get elected if there's censure either. So, and he won't get elected at any public office as soon as you show the Capitol building being taken over again. So, I don't know, you know, my concern in Washington, D.C. is this. On the side of our head, we have ears. We hear with ears. Problem is, the greatest act, though, with your ears is to listen. That's an art. And we haven't had that for a lot of years down there. They don't listen. They're very selfish in what they do. And I think we have to move toward, you were just discussing it before you picked the phone up with me, about how to get people back together again. You have to become more selfless, you know, and all of us do.
Jim,
me too.
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, I think just we have other callers, but I'm going to let Chrissy respond.
All right, I'm done.
No problem.
The question is...
Go ahead. Go ahead. Are you there? Hello? I don't know where you went, but okay, I will attempt to answer what I thought was the question. As far as I understand this, I think you're absolutely right that Article 25 doesn't make sure that President Trump cannot run again. I think you're correct in assuming that this probably won't be the course of action that this administration and the vice president will take. I think that I, as a member of Congress, have to do my best to think through all of the optionality, because I think that you're also right, that I think that the ultimate purpose here is to make sure that President Trump will not be able to run again. My understanding, because I'm not a lawyer and I have spent a lot of time trying to hear and to listen, is that a way to do that is through impeachment and through the process through the Senate. That is, as far as I understand it, my only methodology to do that. I do not believe, and I could be corrected on this, that censorship does that. I do also believe that there's a possibility through the judiciary, and it remains to be seen what will be done there. But I do have this sense of urgency that I think that you talked a little bit about with Clyburn's statement. We are 435 members here, and we all have very, very different ideologies, personalities, districts that we represent. And so I think what's been enlightening and informing to me in my early time here is trying to figure out how to go and work with all 435 of us to head in some, generally speaking, direction that is useful to the country. And I'm very appreciative of all the things that you asked, because it's complicated, and just trying to understand all of the processes and mechanisms and trying to do the right thing. It has been an important challenge to me.
Jim, thank you so much for your question. And we have come to the time, ladies and gentlemen, for our last question of the evening. If we haven't gotten back to you, please, we will get back to you in the next 24 to 48 hours. We will get the information from the phone lines to make sure that we can call someone back. We also encourage you to please call our office with any questions. If you had a question or have a question in the aftermath of this conversation, please give us a call at our office. I'd like to now, I think we have one more question from Eliza. Eliza, you should be on the phone. Eliza, can you hear us? Hello? All right. Oh, hello?
Hello?
Hello, yes,
Hello?
we can hear you. Yep. Can you hear us? We can hear you.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello, we're looking for Eliza. Is this Eliza?
Yeah. My question is, I watched the news and, I heard that Trump's gonna try to run again in 2024, and I'm just wondering, what's gonna happen.
Hi, Eliza. I've learned a lot in my couple of years here in Congress, and one is that I can't predict the future, but I can try to do the best job that I can for our community. And I think that one of the things I hope that you've learned or heard from this conversation is that we all have to take our responsibility seriously as citizens, and we all have to make sure that we're educated and informed, and that we're making good choices, and that we're all participating. I really believe in our country. Eliza, I don't know how old you are, but it sounds like that you might be younger. And I really believe that we can come together and we can heal, and that we have not seen, we will see better days. And so I will keep working on that. I know you will keep working on that wherever you are. And please, Eliza, if you have a chance when all things get better, and this goes for all of you guys on this phone call, come and visit me and my team, because we'd very much like to see you in the flesh. It looks as though, I just got a text saying that I have to go vote. So I'll turn it to Connor and see if that's true or not, and see what we should be doing with the remainder of our time.
That is true. For everyone on the line, Congresswoman Houlihan is in Washington, and she has just been summoned to the House floor to go vote. So, Christy, I would just leave it to you to say goodbye, and then we will end our conversation this evening.
Thank you guys for being here, and I am very, very grateful for the opportunity to serve you all. I'm very appreciative of the conversations that we've had today, and with the decency and civility that we've approached this with, and I really appreciate us assuming the best of one another. I had a conversation on the floor, and I know Connor's going to kill me because it looks like I really have to go, that had to do with Valley Forge, which is a place that's really personal to all of us. It's in our community. And I remember it's where I go running when I have to think something through. And I think about that heritage of that place and the place where it was just so dark and cold and people died in service of our country. They didn't die in a battle. You know, they died there because they didn't have food, or they had disease, or they were too cold. And at the end, however, they emerged better and stronger. And at the end, we were a better country, and it ultimately became, you know, the country that we all prize and value. So I am very resolved. I know we are all resolved. I know we're being tested in a way that many of us have never experienced, and I hope we never experience again. So thanks again for the open and candid conversation. We will be having another town hall shortly. I think that will be focusing on some of the questions that were brought up on COVID and our inoculations, vaccinations. So please stay in tune for those as well. Thank you, and I will, with that, go head off to the Capitol. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a safe evening.